Now, one of the earlier videos for this passage, I talked about how the double passage and the historical passage are not really any different from any of the others in the SAT. We use the same process, we use the same strategies. It's just another passage. The same stuff works. It's just maybe the language is harder in the passage. So in fact, it's all the more reason to use those other strategies, because those other strategies direct our attention away from the lines in the passage and towards the choices, which we're much more likely to understand. If there is an exception, it's that with the double passage, since we kind of have like two really short passages in one, a lot of times it's difficult to kind of follow the no reading strategy because we get questions like number 16 kind of in the middle that require us to basically do the entire second passage at once, right? We're supposed to read this and, and get the main idea. Now, normally, whole passage questions would be the ones that we save for last. Make sure you do everything else first, get a sense of what's going on, and then come back to this at the end. And we wouldn't need to read the whole passage because the other questions, in theory, would direct us to enough of the passage that we'd understand what it's about. In the double, that might not happen as much because there are just fewer questions that bring us to the lines, and because the passages are so short, you kind of end up reading all of it anyway. So here's a case where you might just want to do this question, read the passage, and answer it without worrying about the no reading strategy. But I will say this, we do not need to read this thoroughly. We want to read it for central ideas. We want to get a sense of what it's about without having to spend a long time analyzing it and trying to understand it. If we don't understand what they're saying because it's in this old-timey language, we can't dwell on it. We have to move on and trust that we understood enough to answer the question. And that is still a very big part of the no reading strategy, is that we don't put the emphasis on the text. The emphasis is on the choices and the question. So I'm going to show you what really reading it should feel like, how little we need to understand in order to confidently get the central claim. So let's use the highlighter here. Now, as I go through, obviously on the real test, you can't highlight, you don't have a highlighter. However, you have your pencil, and you should be reading it in this way, kind of like noticing repeating ideas, noticing things that seem to carry a lot of weight, and letting the repetition tell you what to care about, and instead of reading the specifics of every kind of sentence. So let me show you. So the investigation of the rights of the slave has led me to better understanding of my own. I have found the anti-slavery cause to be the high school of morals in our land, the school in which human rights are more fully investigated and better understood and taught than in any other. Here a great fundamental principle is uplifted and illuminated, and from this central light rays innumerable stream all around. No idea what that last part means. Human beings have rights, and because they are moral beings, the rights of all men grow out of their moral nature, and all men have the same moral nature. They have essentially the same rights. These rights may be wrested from the slave, but they cannot be alienated. His title to himself is as perfect now as is that of Lyman Beecher. It is stamped on his moral being, and it is like it, imperishable. Now, if rights are founded in the nature of our moral being, then the mere circumstance of sex does not give to man higher rights and responsibilities than to woman. To suppose that it does would be to deny the self-evident truth that the physical constitution is the mere instrument of the moral nature. To suppose that it does would be to break up utterly the relations of the two natures and to reverse their functions, exalting the animal nature into a monarch and humbling the moral into a slave, making the former a proprietor and the latter its property. When human beings are regarded as moral beings, sex, instead of being enthroned upon the summit, administering upon rights and responsibilities, sinks into insignificance and nothingness. My doctrine, then, sounds important, is that whatever it is morally right for man to do, it is morally right for woman to do. Our duties originate not from difference of sex, but from the diversity of relations in life, the various gifts and talents committed to our care, and the different eras in which we live. So look, I read that really fast. And I understood most of what I read, but mostly because I understood these highlighted parts. Look at what's highlighted. Look at what's repeated. This is really much about rights. This is about slavery. This is about gender, right? This is about the importance of rights and how rights shouldn't matter whether you're a slave or a woman. I get that because it's repeated again and again and again. It comes up so often. And look, there were sentences in there that I didn't highlight anything, because she was kind of just like going on and on about it. And I get the point, or she was being poetic and the point was made much better somewhere else. And so that's the key. That's really the key to the entire reading section right there, is there are going to be things that you don't understand as you read. But you have to let go of this compulsion to reread it a million times until you understand it. Because focus on the stuff that you do understand. They repeat themselves. So if you understood a different part of the passage, the odds are good that the part you're having trouble with is just repeating that same idea. Because main ideas are repeated ideas. If the thing you're having trouble with is important, you'll get that same idea somewhere else. You have to trust that. That's how writing works. Now look, even if we were still a little iffy on what we read, we can use the choices to guide us. And look, at the end too, we have a really clear sentence, right? This is a sentence that I think everyone can understand. There's nothing old-timey about this language here. My doctrine then is that whatever it is morally right for man to do, it is morally right for woman to do. That's a clear sentence, right? That's not lost in some translation here. That is absolutely clear, and it makes it clear, hey, this is what this author is saying. So let's look at the choices. The rights of individuals are not determined by race or gender. Well, we talk a lot about rights, we talk a lot about race, we talk a lot about gender. Seems relevant. Not to mention, they're not determined by race or gender, meaning that what she's saying is that your race and your gender have nothing to do with your rights. You have those rights regardless of those things. So this seems pretty strong of a match. But obviously we need to look at the others. B, men and women must learn to work together to improve society. Well, it leaves out the slavery thing, and so that's not great. But must learn to work together is very strong. And so strong kind of words bother me in choices. So is she talking about men and women? Yes. Is she talking about improving society, though? I don't really remember highlighting any of that. So that doesn't seem like a good match for what I've highlighted. So certainly A is a better match than B. Maybe you don't completely eliminate B, but I think if we're ranking choices here, A is definitely better. C, moral rights, well, they definitely talk about that, are the most important distinction between human beings and animals. When did they talk about animals? I think there was one spot where they talk about it, but they're never comparing animals and humans. It's just, no, this choice is so obviously wrong because look at my highlighting, right? The word animal is not highlighted here. And it comes up once. I forget, animal nature, that's the only spot. So the point of this highlighting was to create a dumb summary knowing that main ideas are repeated ideas. So yes, do they mention animals? Sure. But how could it be a main idea if it's only mentioned once in one line? That's not a good sign. Main ideas are repeated ideas. Random thoughts are just random thoughts. They're probably not important if they're only said once and we just move on. So that's a good sign that choice is wrong. D, men and women should have equal opportunities to flourish. I call this a bumper sticker choice because it reminds me of a very nice kind of saying where no one's going to disagree, and it's something you'd plaster on the back of your car because it's a nice little slogan, but it has nothing to do with what we're reading, right? Yes, of course, who doesn't agree that men and women should have equal opportunities to flourish? But who cares? That is not what this person is saying. So they're talking about rights, not opportunities. And they're not really talking about flourishing. I don't really know what that's about. I guess maybe at the end she does talk about gifts and talents. So that's a little tempting. But again, same principle as the word animal. If it's not repeated again and again, it really can't be a main idea. So we're not seeing that throughout the passage. It's really just this one last line or two that gets it to us. So A has a lot of matches, and they're not just matches with one place. Right? Men and women are mentioned in at least 2 of the paragraphs. Rights are certainly mentioned in all of them, again and again and again. And then slavery, race, is mentioned in at least 2 of the paragraphs as well. So those ideas are clearly important enough that they come up again and again. They would be considered central to the passage, and that is why choice A is right. Notice how confident we can be in our answer with a dumb summary of what we read. Not with some detailed line-by-line analysis. We don't need that. Don't waste time. Don't waste mental energy understanding things that don't matter for your answer. If something is confusing, move on. Trust that you will figure it out anyway using other stuff for these main idea things. It works.